Good morning, Realty Executives.
Good morning.
How are you?
Great.
Good. Thank you, and welcome to our Commercial 104 class. We're going to have an awesome time. We're going to talk about commercial. We're going to talk about NOI. We're going to talk about cap rates, cash flow, and we're also going to bring on our very special guest, Mr. Dennis Fontes, to talk about financing. So if everybody's ready, say I'm ready.
I'm
I'm
ready.
ready, let's go. Okay, so what we want to do, we want to first start out with commercial, and what we want to do is, I want to help Dennis out because he told me to talk a little bit about the rent roll. The rent roll is very important. So whenever you have a commercial property that you're trying to analyze, you always want to make sure that you have a correct rent roll. So what is a correct rent roll? Well, first of all, it talks about the unit type, as you can see here, talks about what the current rent is, and it talks about what the square footage of the rent is, okay? So down at the bottom, you see you have a gross monthly income of $10,000 to $20,000, that's our example. And then we have extra income. Now, extra income or other income could be garage storage, it could be storage, it could be laundry, it could be vending machines, it could be a number of things. So you want to make sure that you include that. Then when you have your total monthly income here, then you multiply it by 12, and that gives you your annual income, okay? Then also, you want to remember about your expenses. Your expenses are anything you can write a check for, okay? So basically, I want you to remember the word tummy. Tummy has to do with taxes. You write a check for taxes to Uncle Sam. Your utilities, your water, power, electric. You have your maintenance, because there's always maintenance on the property. You have your management, and you have your insurance. So to remember this, you use tummy, and that is your expenses, okay? Now, what's critical about any type of evaluation of income property, you have to know the NOI, which is the net operating income. The way that you come to this number is you take your gross scheduled rental income, and what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to take 5% vacancy factor, okay? Because that's what the bank is going to want to see. So no matter what your income is, if you have a vacancy factor at the property or not, doesn't make any difference, you got to take 5%. So when you subtract 5% from your gross scheduled income, you're going to have what they call the net rental income. Here it is right here. And then you have to add your other income. What is your other income? Laundry income, garage, storage, things like that, okay? So when you do all of that, you get what they call the total operating income, okay? But you're not done, because you have to subtract your expenses, which is your tummy, taxes, utilities, maintenance, management, insurance, and now you get your net operating income. This is the first step to evaluating any type of commercial property, okay? Is everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Let's move on. Now, I've created a little calculator here to help you to determine what is the value, what is the cap rate, or what is the net operating income, okay? The only thing you have to do is cover the little piece that you're looking for, and then just use the calculator here, okay? So let's say, for example, I'm looking for price. What I would do, I would cover the price, and I would divide the cap rate into the NOI. So we're going to do a little exercise right here, just so that we could make sure that you guys are on track here. So if I want to know what price to pay, and let's say, for example, I had the net operating income of $60,000, right? And I was going to use a cap rate of 5. Oops, I'm sorry. Cap rate of 5%, okay? This is my cap rate here, 5%. This is my net operating income of $60,000. How would I find my price? What I would do is I will divide the cap rate into the NOI. It's very easy. I'm looking for price, so I'm dividing my cap rate into the NOI. Can someone tell me what price I should be paying? Somebody whip out their calculators for me.
300,000?
300,000? I don't think so.
3 million.
No, I don't think so. Anybody got a calculator? I know the finance man has one. How much is it, Dennis?
1.2.
1.2 million. Excellent. So, here, this is how this works. This is working out pretty good. If I have a, oh no, sorry, let me go back. If I have income, net operating income of 60,000, and if I wanted to have a 5% cap rate, I would have to pay $1.2 million for the building. Absolutely. Let's do it again. Let's use a 4 cap. If I use a 4 cap, I still got 60,000 net operating income. How much am I going to pay for the building?
1.5.
Yeah.
1.5 million. Absolutely. You see that? All right. Let's go up here. Let's use 7. Now I got a 7 cap rate. I still got the same income. So how much am I paying for the building?
857.
4.
857?
No.
All right. $857,000. Very good. So let me ask you a question. Which property is more valuable? Which property is more valuable? If I'm using a 6% cap rate, okay, and I'm in California, okay, versus Texas, okay, and I got a 10% cap rate in Texas, and I got a 6% cap rate in California, which property is more valuable? This is a good one.
California.
Well, we know it's California, but why is it California?
Because one is 1 million.
I mean, wait a minute, my cap rate is 10%.
Yeah.
I got a higher cap rate. Why is California more valuable?
Because
Taxes?
Price.
Yeah.
Price.
Price.
The price.
Net operating.
No, the net operating income is the same
One
for
is
Texas and for California.
one is 600,000. One is 1 million.
Very good. Did you guys see that?
Yes.
So what is the cap rate in Texas? 10%. So if I was going to buy this building at a 10% cap rate with income of 60,000, how much am I going to pay for the building?
600.
600,000.
How much?
600,000.
600,000. Now, I'm using the same income, but my cap rate in California is 6%. How much am I paying?
1 million. 1 million.
How much am I paying?
1 million.
$1 million. Absolutely. So therefore, I'm at 1 million over here. So therefore, the higher the cap rate, the lower the price. The lower the cap rate, higher the price. That's right. Don't let it trip you up. Why is California real estate so high?
Inflation.
Well, I heard it from somewhere.
Cost of living.
Supply and demand.
Cap rate.
No, why is California real estate so high? California's real estate is so high because of the land value. The land value in California is extremely high from the tip of Tijuana all the way up to Oregon. The land value is extremely high because it's a coast. So if you have a high land value starting out, then whenever you put on top of the land, it's going to be high. Versus Texas, that doesn't have our kind of land value. Just a little information for you. I thought I'd find it interesting, okay? So, lower the cap, higher the price, right? You guys with me?
Yeah.
All right, we're rolling. All right, so what is DCR? DCR, we talked about this before. DCR is what they call the debt service coverage ratio. To make a long story short, it basically means, can the cash flow cover the debt service? Now, what is debt service in the commercial world? What does it mean?
Mortgage.
The mortgage payment. Very good. That's the mortgage payment. So whenever you hear debt service in the commercial world, it means the mortgage payment. So basically, whenever you're financing a property, and the reason I'm talking about this is when Dennis starts talking about DCR, you know what he's talking about. Basically, the bank wants to know, can the income cover the mortgage payment? If it cannot, you're in the negative. If it can, you're looking pretty good. The bank usually wants to see a DCR of 1.2 or 1.25 or higher. Even though I've seen some that are getting a little bit more aggressive, but basically that's what they want to see, okay? So let's figure out how we're going to calculate all of this. Because now you know all the numbers we're talking about, you shouldn't get lost. Let's talk about cash flow first. Cash flow is determined by taking the NOI, there it is right there, and subtracting the debt service or the mortgage payment, right? So if I have $50,000 in a mortgage payment, if I have income of $60,000, that means my cash flow is $10,000 a year. Is that positive or negative? Positive, very good, it's positive. So now, the way that we calculate debt coverage ratio is real easy. We use our NOI again, you see why that's so important. Then we want to divide the debt service into the NOI. We want to put this number into that number, and when you do that, you get a DCR of 1.2. DCR is not a percentage, it's always a whole number, okay? So basically, as long as we're in the positive around here somewhere, a bank will buy us somewhere, okay? Okay, any questions?
What should be the DCR number that is good for us, that we should be looking for?
1.25.
1.25.
Right.
What is the lender looks at that?
Well, I'll cover that, but I'll do now. So it depends on the property. An apartment building would be closer to 1.2, maybe even 1.15. But if you have a different style of commercial, like a regular commercial, let's say an automotive or something different, then that debt coverage ratio will be higher. It'll be closer to 1.3. I've seen them as high as 1.45. I think a bank looks at different types of property having a different risk, I suppose, because if you own a 12-unit apartment building anywhere within a couple miles of here, it's going to be rented. It's a much less risk for anybody, the owner or a bank, and so the debt coverage ratio is closer to the payment. The chances are you're going to collect enough rent to keep the loan going. Whereas a commercial property that may have a slightly different use, you may not be able to replace that tenant as you can like in a residential type deal. So that's the reason why DCRs do vary.
Very good, thank you so much. And he's going to talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to speed up a little bit more here so Dennis can come on. Cash on cash return is determined by dividing the cash flow by the down payment. So therefore, remember our cash flow is $10,000, and if we put down $100,000, that means that our cash on cash return is 10%. Okay? All right. So I'm just going to touch briefly on leverage. On our next session, we're going to get into it deeper. But why do we have leverage? What does leverage mean? The definition of leverage is the use of borrowed funds to finance a portion of the cost of an investment. Okay, so what is the purpose of leverage? The purpose is to maximize the rate of return on capital invested. So let me ask you a question. Is it better to put down all cash on the property, or is it better to put down a percentage? Which one do you guys think?
Percentage.
A percentage. Why is it better to put down a percentage?
You could buy multiple properties with the same amount.
That's number one. What else?
You get a higher return on your cash.
You get a higher rate of return. Okay, what else?
Tax write-off?
Tax benefit. That's it. You guys are sharp this morning. All three are correct. So basically, the next time we go through this, we're going to be talking about, and we're going to break down the scenarios. We're going to talk about loan A. When you put 10% down, it's a higher risk, but also I get a higher return. Loan B, we're going to see 50% down. It's a moderate risk, and I only get moderate return. And then on loan C, if I put 100% down, very minimal risk, and very, very low return. We're gonna be going over that when we do 105. But right now, I want to bring Dennis on. He's going to give us a good overview of financing. So why don't you put your hands together for Mr. Dennis Fuentes.
Thank you, Michael. That was probably one of the better overview presentations I've seen, because how many of you have been involved in a transaction, either a listing agent or representing a buyer related to commercial or apartment buildings, when the apartment building is 5 units or more, or some sort of commercial mixed use? How many have been involved? Okay, I'll raise my hand too. So I've done many, many hours of commercial training and so on. And again, I want to compliment the style and the level that was allowing comprehension, okay? What sometimes maybe creates some hesitation as a real estate agent, you're the boots on the ground. You're in front of that building, you're speaking with your client, you're counseling with your client, and you absolutely need the right tools to take the next step and certainly be able to write an offer, accept an offer, and so on. And the pricing is a big part of it. I would say if you were going to spend some time drilling down a location, a type of property for a client, what I highlighted in yellow, the bank and the industry calls assumptions. And these are the things, exactly what Michael was talking about. The assumptions are, I'm assuming, if you want to play the word literally, that there's a 5% vacancy. But would you say a strip mall with a cleaners and I don't know, they don't have video place anymore, do they? A computer repair guy, and 6 or 7 of these doors, would that only be 5% vacancy? Would that be 5% vacancy in Belmont Shore? Or would it be 5% vacancy in Cudahy? Would it be 5% vacancy in San Bernardino? You see what happens. So one of the things is to, when you want to speak to, let's say there's a listing agent that's sold dozens and dozens of commercial real estate, you want to speak key pieces of information, and you throw the word out there, what are the assumptions of this property that you have on market? That takes you to like their lingo. So you want to know what vacancies would be for the type of property and of course the location, and we all can relate to what I'm saying. The same goes with expenses. Expenses could vary as well. What if you had 11 individual one-bedroom wooden 1942 houses? That would be different than a property that was built brand new in the last 4 years with the latest code, that had the most items that were the least maintenance in one building, right? So the expenses for maintenance, etc., would be significantly different between the two. So as you can imagine, how much it costs to operate a building changes how tummy is going to turn out, and that's the expenses. And then of course cap rate. The way I like to look at cap rate. Let's say you've got this giant wheelbarrow of cash, and you're going to run around and you're going to talk to your financial advisor. Hi, I need to invest this money. Real estate, stock market, savings account. Savings account, how much you're going to get? 1.25% return on your money. You're going to slam $1.2 million or whatever in cash, and you're going to get a return of 1%. Okay, you're going to buy 3, Lakewood houses that are bread and butter, and you're going to expect a certain return. You're going to buy a T-bill at 3.2 or 2.8, which is bulletproof. You're going to get a return. Now you're gonna go buy a 16-unit apartment building in San Bernardino. Are you gonna say, I'm good with 3.8 return? Probably not, because you can go in, right, and get 30-year bond money at the same return. So think of like the cap rate as, what if a guy paid cash, it subtracted the vacancy, subtracted the expenses, he has a net operating income that's gonna return all of his dough that just paid cash for this building, because that's his CD. Okay, so I'm trying to give you some real basic things that's easy to relate to, because you're out on the streets and you don't have time to go through a class, you know, when you're trying to get closer to closing a deal in a conversation. But as this thing's scaring me. Is there a mouse flying around? So this thing here, so let's say the vacancy is 3%, okay? So what happens to the value when 3% is kicked in, right? You have a higher value, just like Michael was saying. But what happens if you're in San Bernardino or whatever, not to pick on those guys, but we're not gonna go to Texas because that's just way too much. Okay, so we won't go anywhere within California to put a deal together. But let's just say apartment building has a different cap rate than an automotive situation or a strip mall. So the key thing again is when you're hunting down a piece of property, you're trying to figure out what your client is investing in, you want to try to figure out what is the cap rate in that. There's a location, this is another term, there's a, location, there's a area, but there's also what's called in the commercial world, sub-market. Sub-market is what you want to attach those assumptions to. And sub-market is those little pockets. More so than Lakewood. There's a sub-market of, you would over towards Cherry of Lakewood, has a slightly different sub-market for rental property than you would right on the edge of 90808, okay? So same with Long Beach is even a bigger exaggeration. You have West Side or North Long Beach would be a sub-market of Long Beach versus Belmont Shore, okay? So that's where you want to be sensitive to the sub-market and the assumptions that are going on with those. So if you go into a sub-market, what's the cap rate? Again, somebody want to make 4% in West Side or North Long Beach? They probably want to have a little stronger return, okay? And that all changes and varies as the economy moves around. Right now, because nice, clean, good location apartment buildings are priced pretty high. But people are willing to take a 3.8, a 2.2 return on their money because they're expecting rents to just be ramping up, and then the appreciation will come into play, which will give them a return, and through appreciation, not just cash flow. Yes?
So Dennis, when we talk about the sub-market and the assumptions, so in the MLS, for example, we have Lakewood, and there are certain sub-areas, if you will, within it. Is that what?
Yeah, this is the hard part, to be at another level, is to understand how and where to get the right data for, we'll call it those three categories. It's very important. And if the listing agent, say, how did you derive at that price? Oh, he has $110,000 in gross rent. Great. What was the assumptions that you used, sir? He's like, ooh. If they can't answer, I don't even know what you're talking about. This guy's not experienced, or girl's not experienced. But if you say, well, what vacancy factor did you utilize there? And what expenses did you utilize there? And the other key thing is, don't be afraid to ask for 2 years of income expense history. Like the tax return of rental property would be listed on Schedule E, where all rental is. If they're willing to snapshot just those pages of that building, that's good information. They're going, I don't want to give that. The guy writes off the kitchen sink, or he sandbags the cash and doesn't, claim all the rent, okay? So there's a trick there, and that leads to another piece, which is typically you'll see a piece of property, and how many have ever heard of somebody owning a piece of property forever? I'm afraid to raise the rent. I'm afraid to raise the rent. These are great tenants, I want to move out, blah, blah, blah. So you go back to an investor that's looking for a piece of property, and let's say the rents are coming in at $90,000 because the guy hasn't raised the rent. See what happens? We lost $300,000 in value. Maybe I should have told you, look, changed. Okay? And let's say we have a cap rate in this location. You like my tool? 5.5, all right? Where's the value? 1.3 right now, right? Million. So the property, so we're in a cap rate, the submarket's roughly around 5.5 because of the nature of that property, it's mixed use or whatever it is, that's kind of what's happening. You can take comps and look at the comps and use that little pie thing that Michael had. What did this puppy sell for? What were the rents? And do the math. I suggest, as a quick and easy one, 5%. If it seems like an obscure piece of property, you might raise it to 7 or 8%. If it's a nice, sweet little apartment building, I might lower it to 3% because they're never empty, right? So those are rules of thumb that you can operate with. That's why I call this my 90-second valuation worksheet, right? So then those things are easy to figure out. You just look at the building, figure out what's going on. You say, oh, this is a nice, clean building. I'm going to give it a 3 to 5%. And then the industry, lending-wise and so on, what we do is we size the loan, okay? And sizing the loan gets me to the NOI. So to make things easier and smoother, you can have me size the loan. And what am I going to ask for? What am I going to ask for? I may know the assumptions because I'm going to kind of figure out a little bit of that, but you're right. But I'm going to ask for the rent roll, the income expense. So the number one document for any deal to represent your client, both listing the property or a buyer, is when you see something, you really need to know, can you please provide me with a 2-year history of the income and expense on how this building is performing? My lender's gonna want it no matter what, no matter where I go. Because the first thing they ask me is, what's the income expense of this property? They already kind of know because the banks are doing deals all the time. They kind of, oh, that's a submarket that's probably at about 6.25 cap. That kind of property is rolling about 12% vacancy. We're kind of doing that all day on our side. You want to just get a fair understanding that, geez, this property is way overpriced, or that seems like a very well-priced piece of property. That's kind of what this tool does. So again, if you've got a property that's got low rents, and they're asking, well, we'll use these numbers. Let me change this to, let's go with 6%. Sometimes when I'm bored, I just turn this thing on and I just start changing numbers and so forth. Okay, $1 million, right? 9,999. So now you have a $90,000 annual income. You see it on the setup sheet. That's another term. You don't normally see these properties on MLS. You see them on LoopNet or other commercial routes. And don't be shy to say, do you have a setup sheet? Okay. Some guys will have a 15-page report of a setup sheet that's more sophisticated. And the setup sheet hopefully has an income and expense history. Okay. So those are really, really, really important. So now when you get a hold of those, you've got your tummy in your hand. Something like that. So, and the setup sheet, if it's the actual tax return, it's the income, the income's reported is already taken the fact that the vacancy's already been taken care of because they didn't collect the rent. You don't collect rent on vacancy, so you can use the hard number off of a tax return, okay? So, but what if the guy says, this property is worth, 1.2, right? You're going, sir, your income is 90, I have a vacancy for that area roughly 6, and my expense, whatever, is 35-ish or something, and with a cap rate, that's kind of like $1 million. He says, yeah, but you can raise the rent. You can raise the rent. What do you do with that? How do you do that? I'm Mexican, just like a Mexican stand. I can say that. I'm a Mexican stand-up, right? I can say that. So how does that work? Okay? Again, I have an idea. So the listing agent says, yeah, but you can just raise the rent. The buyer says, I'm running a risk. Because now I've either got turnover or whatever, and I've got to do all the heavy lifting to get my price. So sorry, we're not going to play that game. So somewhere, that's why it's so important to know how to get those assumptions drilled down. That's why it's so important to get the income expense up front that's reasonable and accurate so that you can, I'll email this thing to you guys want to. And that way you guys can find out, say, you know what, that seems a little high priced. And you can call the agent, say, how did you come up with that again? What were your assumptions? Are you pro forma future rents? And then you have the argument. It's a very basic argument. Well, somebody's got to pay for that. And so you can then put a clause in your contract. Seller to raise the rents $20,000 so we can get your price prior to close. And let him go through the payment.
So Dennis, can you explain what happens when you're in a rent control area compared to not being in a rent control area? And then we start talking about, you can raise the rents.
And you can. So then the argument has regulation that's going to stop that party, because if you buy a piece of property, you're restricted from rolling it up, and therefore you don't have a smart buy. I mean, it's that simple. I think that's where you can't use that. Neither side can use that. It doesn't make sense for them to raise the rent. The guy doesn't have any idea what he's doing if he doesn't realize it's in rent control. You know what I mean? So that part is good to know. Then you just have to make an offer. What's the smart price? Because the listing agent's probably wrestling with a seller that says, I want this, I want that, and he's got to find a way to get him broken down and get him in the right spot. And nobody's going to pay more than the fair market value, unless they can see some vision on doing something with some of these more expert guys that can kind of trick out an old school apartment building and make it one of these old hep deals with some dough. So this was really great, like I said, with what Michael had covered, because he covered a lot of my information there. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, that's good. I like it. But I think this is kind of a good way to just see it live and watching it cycle around, and that it seems so simple. But go ahead.
Wouldn't you have an argument over vacancy? Who determines vacancy rate and the cap rate? I mean, the listing agent can say, my vacancy rate is this number, and then the selling agent says, oh, I came up with a different vacancy rate. The same thing as cap rate.
Okay, so vacancy rates might be a little easier for everybody to accept and absorb. Okay, you can almost Google it. What's the vacancy rate for 90808? What's the vacancy rate for blah, blah, blah? You'll see all kinds of junk flying out there that'll give a range. And that's all you can do is give a range. Because if the rents are 20,000 low, there's a zero vacancy rate, right? But in lending, they're going to take a sub-market vacancy factor, okay? And you can kind of roll the rent up in escrow as long as it's not a what do you call it, a rent control area. But in most cases, what I think moves the needle a bit more is the cap rate. And you can figure that out by looking at sales. By looking at sales, the closed transactions, to see what did this sell for. Forget the number of units, it doesn't matter how many units. It's what the rent collected. You can have 4 units, they're all 4-bedroom, you have 4 units, they're all 1-bedroom. This would be totally different rent, right? So by taking comps and looking at their either net operating income, you can call the agent that closed the deal and see what it sold for, just like that simple little buy, just divide one and the other and bam, you've got a cap rate. And many times the sales price for LoopNet will give that information. It'll say this is the cap rate. So then you can kind of pick 2 or 3 comps in the sub-market and get a rhythm to say, oh, we're at a, whatever it is, 4 point something, 5 point something cap rate. That's what these puppies are going for. You counsel your client. This is what these are going for. This is how much you're selling for, and so on. So that's where that it comes from. Let me see if I can.
We have a question here then.
Uh-huh.
Hi, Dennis.
Yes.
In the case where you have a commercial property and it's a single tenant, I know all these principles will apply, but is there some extra factors that are considered when it's a single tenant in terms of the evaluation process?
Yes, and that's a great segue. The segue is, we're talking about an investment. We're talking about an investor. We're talking about a person that's not going to live there and a person that's not going to run their business there. Purely an investment. So as a single tenant investment, let's say you buy the In-N-Out over here. That's a single tenant, okay? That particular corner with that particular industry is probably not going to have a whole lot of vacancy, right? Because they probably have, in that case, a multi-year lease. So that lease kind of trumps some of that vacancy factor, makes it minimum. So it gets reviewed differently, okay? Or a little bit more conservative, because now you have deep pockets, if you will, as a tenant versus what do we do? An automotive dismantling company. With a 12,900 square foot warehouse, okay? Warehouses are very valuable, okay? So now you have one giant building, and when that guy moves out, how long is it gonna be to find the right tenant that needs that one door? That's a vacancy factor consideration, okay? And it will come into the math when sizing, remember that term? Sizing the loan. Because the sizing the loan requires rent, scheduled rent, if it's one door, the assumptions to understand what it is. The vacancy can vary based on the single tenant, the use, and so on. And the respective expenses that are associated with it, if it's a deferred type property. So another key thing is, I do this, I have a guy call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about buying this apartment building or a commercial building, blah, 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 blah. I go, where's it at? I don't say, where's the sub-market? Because they don't know what that means. I say, where's that? So I said, oh, it's on the west side over there off of Santa Fe. Ding, 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 sub-market, right? Then I'll say, what does it consist of? Another term is like the unit mix, okay? What does it consist of? It's got 2 storefronts in the front and 2 apartments in the back. It's interesting. The rent in the back's probably going to stay pretty strong, but the front with 2, hairdo lady and a retail guy's going to be. You've seen Long Beach Boulevard. You have some of those doors empty for 6 months sometimes, right? So then I'll take a cap rate of, who would put, all cash over there and get my return on my money, maybe 5 3/4, 6 1/4, something like that. I'll just go bing, bing, bing. I think the property's worth about this much, and I'll be within 5 or 10% when the appraisal comes in. That's how I want you guys to be able to do this. And what I'll use Michael's suggestion, 5%. Maybe I'll say 7 in what I just described. I'll use 38% expense because it sounds like it's kind of a mixed-use older place, okay? And then I'll use a cap rate of, the 5.25. Cap rates are really low with everything right now. And just to kind of get me in the hunt. The guy maybe refinancing, how much do you owe? And so so for you guys, I would use 5%, and I would use anywhere from 32 to 38% expense, okay? And I would just move the needle on the expense as to how new, how clean, and how well it would be easier to maintain versus the general construction. You can Google that, you hardly even have to drive by, just a rough. It's because a bank is going to have an appraiser walk out there. And he's going to know that submarket. He's going to know that kind of that cap rate hunt there, right? And he's going to kind of have an idea of vacancy, and he's going to give a general idea because he's not going to know the true expenses, but that's how he or she is going to judge expenses. And they're just going to go bing, 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 value $1 million. And so for us, that's a great way to weed out those that are overpriced or want to list overpriced, what's a smart buy or a fair market value. And I wanted to at least give you an easy, on-the-fly, 90-second way to just be in the hunt of where the value is. And like I said, Michael covered all of these things. There's so much different background. And for a lender, you can even print out this little sheet and PDF it to me and send me an income expense if you can get an income expense history. And say, Dennis, can you size this loan? Because now we're going to fall into the debt coverage ratio, right? And because part of it is, many times people say, well, how much down payment do I need to do on this building? Okay, which is where I meant to segue. Have you ever heard of SBA?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever, and you know SBA, you have to occupy at least 51% of the space, okay? So when you run a business, we did an auto dismantling place, and he had a smaller place he was paying rent. He needed a bigger place because he was growing. And he had a chance to buy his own place. And the guy made an offer, and the offer was written up, 10% down. And an astute listing agent says, commercial usually needs a lot more down than 10%, a lot more, right? However, does this person qualify for SBA? Now, guess what? That DCR thing, it goes right out the window. Right out the window. What is this business running, and how much is he paying rent over here? Because he's not going to have rent anymore, and his business is alive and kicking, making money. So it's kind of like saying, bank, what's the problem? I'm going to replace my rent with a mortgage payment, and the SBA can land up to 90%. You can even do a construction loan, that's even more complicated. They'll lend up to 90%, okay? And not worry about debt coverage ratio. They look at cash flow of this person's business. So when counseling a buyer, or in the case of a single tenant, right, that could be a good owner-user situation. And so you can consult with me about what a person's business that wants to expand or move or duplicate location and so on, give me those tax returns of how his business is rolling, and then I can size it for SBA and say this guy's business can hold water for $785,000 in borrowing power. And you'll say, well, Jesus, place is $1 million. I'll say, well, $1 million minus 780 something, that's the down payment. And whether it's 82%, 87%, up to 90% is simple math, okay? And so that's how we put that transaction together. And then what happens is I'm a broker, mortgage broker, and I have all these different sources. So I'm going to size and be a matchmaker. How much time do I have? I'm going to wrap it up in a minute. I'll be a matchmaker. So I'll figure out these different lenders, you know, and see if there's some quirk with the file. And this guy, Gary, he's arranged different pieces of property, industrial building in Wilmington. He did a refinancing and gave some capital. We can offer capital for doing improvements so that you can modify this, I don't know, auto dismantling place to have to do like some plumbing or whatever. You know, a medical building it can be done, or even a mixed use. You can get working capital, you can get revolving credit lines, you can even do some rehab. So there's quite a bit of opportunity. Here's one here. I have a lady that runs home health care. Okay, she buys 4-bedroom houses and rents them at the annual income on a 4-bedroom house. You do the math, is $420,000. She gets 6 beds as a limit, and she gets $36,000 a month for a 4-bedroom house. Of course, she's got to pay the help and the licensing and big fat insurance and stuff like that. So she has, how are you going to get a loan at a local regular Fannie Mae? Is going to happen when they walk in, they got 6 beds. The healthcare, it's going to turn down, it won't work. So I provide financing for this woman. It's run as a business. So I was able to work it as SBA and provide her with financing. And so my role is to understand what's going on with the property, figure out what's going on with the client, income, etc., credit, stuff like that. And remember, in both investment or SBA, in investment, the very first thing is the building has to qualify first. Okay, the building qualifies by the cash flow, and forgive me, I did make some calculations of the debt coverage ratio. I didn't have time, but the DCR is the acronym, debt coverage ratio. It needs to be 1.2 or whatever. And you know, that means that there has to be positive cash flow. If there's not, what changes?
The price.
Down
Down payment or loan amount. So I'm going to size the loan. Just keep going down, down, down. I'm watching my debt coverage ratio hit my mark. And boom, I finally hit it. You know, 1.25 for that property. And look at this price and say, you got to put 35% down. So it's not unusual for investment commercial to put 35 to 55% down, just because debt coverage ratio is the driving force. Okay, SBA throws it out the window, and now you can go all the way up to 90% because the company makes enough money to make those payments pretty close to 1-to-1, because he can afford it over there and he's making money, so they'll allow some of that profit to assist in getting rid of the rent, right, and be able to justify X mortgage to make it work. And then when you get that far, yes sir.
Dennis, could you give us some examples of down payment for an investment property? For example, you got multifamily, what are the down payments versus a retail strip center versus a larger commercial?
Yeah, so if you have a very large, very well-performing apartment building, 35 units, 68 units, etc. You have, big numbers too, right? Especially in the LA area. And so there's lenders that only lend at $1 million on up. They don't touch anything less than that. You go through the red tape to get you there, and they lend as much as 80% loan to value, so 20% down. But remember, the catch is, can my assumptions spit out a 1.15 debt coverage ratio. So we have these guys here, you know, give me, no, not this guy, but, you know, they'll give you apartment building, blah, 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 million on a 1.15 debt coverage ratio, up to 80%. So it's possible to do 20% down, but it seems impossible by the time you get done with the math, because the values are so high that it trumps into 25% down on a nice, call it semi-trophy type apartment building, okay? 25%, that's what's expected. Commercial is going to be every bit of 35% down. 45, it's not unusual to see a commercial property, because of the debt coverage ratio, might be higher than 1.15, and it just pushes that loan down. That's all that's going on. We're sizing that loan, and it's the down payment. So part of the beauty and what we did in an exercise with this SBA with the auto dismantling, I think I was a little bit short on some dough. Well, I'm a broker, I can do any loan that's got dirt and a building, dirt only, I can do that too, but the guy says, well, I got a lot of equity in my condo. Let me take a look at that. So I refinanced him, sucked 100 grand out of there, and he brought it over to the SBA. So we were able to make it work. And the key is, you want one of these puppies, which is called a letter of interest. It's a pre-qual letter, but it takes a bit more effort. And what are the things that I need to get you a letter of interest? It's a test. I've said it 5 times. What do I need?
Rent rolls.
And
2 years down, income statement.
income, I need the income, I need the a 2-year history of that building. And then, of course, a little bit about the borrower, credit report, which is easy peasy stuff, right? So then, I literally send that in. I make a few phone calls to say, this is the right fit, you guys have an appetite for this type of property use, automotive, whatever it's gonna be, or home health care, and say, you guys are yes or no, and a lot of them say, not right. I call again, yeah, that we do them all the time, fabulous. Todd, let's talk, this is what I have, this is the case that people have going, and I'd like to send you the financials of how this building is performing, both as a refinance or as a listed. And I've got a client that's got $400,000 to work with. Can you size this loan for me based on your guys' back office assumptions? And there you go. So that's my role. You pick up those basic pieces of information and you'll get some answers right away. So if you have any other questions, that's the important pieces that I figured. All right. Thank you very much for having me, and maybe Michael wants to come back for a few.
Great job. Who would like to see Dennis come